Hello, everybody. I'm Richard Bradbury. For those that don't know, I work for the BBC in Research and Development Department, and the work I'm presenting today is a joint effort. And well, most of the work has been done by my colleagues Dev and David. And I'll start by just talking a little bit about this topic, and then we've got a little demo to show you afterwards, and Dev will take over at that point. So the topic is UE data collection, reporting, and event exposure. And you might ask yourself, well, what is that? So there's a bit of background, really, just to explain first of all. So the history of this really is that the SA2 group in 3GPP in release 17 defined this thing called the network data analytics function. And the idea is that this would be a function that sits in the 5G core and collects information from all the different network functions in the 5G core and analyzes it, and then produces information that can then be consumed to maybe improve the network. Not necessarily in real time, but in later releases, I think they do want to do real time kind of optimizations. You can imagine all sorts of machine learning and artificial intelligence systems that use the information that's collected and then optimize the system. So that's the basic idea. And then so this is kind of how it fits into a chain. So on the left-hand side here, you've got any old network function that's producing information in the form of events, which is called event exposure, the analytics function in the middle, and then some output, and then being consumed by any old network function that consumes this information and optimizes the system. So that's all very good. And then there's various different subscription mechanisms to allow things to say, I'm interested in receiving this information, and then receive the information. So in addition to all of that, SA2 also wanted to collect information from the user equipment, from the mobile terminal devices, but they stopped short of defining an architecture for that particular aspect. And they asked the SA4 group, which I attend, to have a look at this. This is all in release 17. And an example of that might be, a UE is moving around the network and experiencing different levels of service, from the radio access network, for example. So to be able to report that sort of service experience to a central function is really valuable information. So basically, they asked SA4 to look at this. And so this is the general architecture that SA4 came up with. So all this stuff on the right is still the same. You've got the NWDEF, and it's spitting stuff out to a data analytics consumer. But then upstream of that, what we did was we defined a particular kind of event producer, which we call the data collection application function. And then in the UE, something which SA2 defines as the direct data collection client, and that does this reporting of data. So those are the aspects that SA4 has concentrated on. And then in addition to that, SA4 realized that there's another potential source of UE information, which is the application logs of application servers that's sitting in the network. So that's another kind of data collection client that could be reporting UE information into this data collection house. And we also identified the potential requirement to expose these things not just to an analytics function inside the 5G network, but also to third parties as well. So we wanted to be able to have a second kind of exposure to a different kind of consumer. So this is basically the scope of this 26531 spec that SA4 developed. So I won't go through this because this is exactly what I've just told you. I'll just skip to the next slide. So the other thing that SA4 developed was a set of procedures to go with that architecture, and I'll just take you through that very briefly. Here's the words, but actually it's better to show you in pictures. So here's the start of the journey. So there's a thing where various different network functions need to register themselves with this network repository function. So in this case, we've got the NWDEF, which is not so much of interest in this context, but I've kept on the diagram just for completeness. But it's mainly the data collection AF itself that does its registration. It says, hello, I'm here, and I can handle these kinds of events. And then the application service provider doing some provisioning needs to be able to register itself, of course, and then do some provision to say, oh, I'm interested in provisioning these kinds of events to be collected. So that's the kind of provisioning part of the 26531 spec. And then there's a second phase, which is all about the consumer subscribing its interest. The NWDAF does this as well, just for completeness. But an external consumer will then, do a discovery. So it talks to this network repository function. It's kind of like looking something up in the telephone directory. And then it actually does the subscription to say, I'm interested in receiving events of this particular type. So that's the subscription part of the flow. And then there's the actual reporting part of the flow, where some application on the UE might talk to this direct data collection client and set up a new reporting session, and the data reporting client fetches its configuration from this data collection AF. So that's that part. And then similarly, there's this other thing, an indirect data collection client, which can also do some reporting, but that's not really interesting in this context. But similarly, the application server can set up a reporting session as well. And then the actual sending of the report. So here's the report being sent by the application and then submitted to the data collection AF. And similarly, you can do this indirectly via this external thing, which is not really of interest. And then thirdly, the application server can do some reporting here in step 17. So that's that aspect. And then once it's been collected by the data collection AF, it processes the report, and then it exposes events to the subscribed consumers, in this case, the NWDAF and the event consumer in the application service provider. So that's this final step here. So that's kind of how it all hangs together. And then what we've done is to create a reference implementation. So Dave and Dev have been beavering away on that for the past few months. And this is kind of the big picture of how everything fits into the overall system. So we have something that is in the UE that does some reporting. We've got this data collection application function in the middle. We've got something that's provisioning it from the application service provider, and then something that's receiving events from it. So that's kind of the big picture stuff. But actually, that's that's very small and not easy to read. But yeah, what we wanted to do was to create this data collection AF, and we did that using a library. So we've created a reusable library, which we call a service provider library, and it provides service endpoints for provisioning, data reporting, and handling event subscriptions, basically. So there's a lot of very generic code in that library. And then in order to make the data collection AF, we instantiate that library in a real application function. And then we implement some actual events. And in this case, the ones that SA2 specified, so like about 4 or 5 of them. And we've just implemented one of them as a demonstration. It's called UE communication. And what that does is that an individual UE, as you're moving around the network, works out how much data it's uploading and downloading, and it reports that back periodically to this data collection AF, and then it can spit out some events to event subscribers. So that just demonstrates a complete end-to-end chain of events. In fact, you call that. So that's this generic standalone UE data reporting and event exposure aspect. And this is pretty much where we've got up to, which is why I've marked all these in green. So we've achieved all of these things. And we've got a kind of a pre-release of the code in the 5gmag repository on GitHub. And then the second aspect of this is all about integrating stuff into the 5G media streaming system, because that also uses this UE data reporting and event exposure mechanism. And the way that we plan to do that is to take this reusable library that I mentioned up here, and then instantiate that not in its own standalone application function, but in the 5G media streaming application function. And in this case, there are two special data reports to do with the media access logs in the application server and this thing called AMDR network assistance. But actually, there's a lot more that's going on in the 5GMS application function that we might want to expose. So actually, we end up with, I think it's five different events that get exposed. So there's already a lot of stuff happening in the 5GMS sorry, 5GMS AF, the application function, that could be reported. And we're currently dumping some of the metrics reports and consumption reports to disk, but actually the ultimate goal will be to spit those out as events that can be consumed by some downstream data analytics function. So that's kind of the next step in this process. So just to give you a more detailed picture of what we've actually implemented so far, we've created this standalone data collection AF component as a reusable C library that runs in an application. And then we've implemented the provisioning interface at reference point R1 here, and the data reporting interface at reference point R2. And the event exposure mechanism, so that this event consumer can subscribe and then get notified asynchronously about events at reference point R6. So that's what we've done, released so far in the repository. It's not a formal release yet. It's just pre-release at this stage, and we have ambition to expand this, and we're interested in other people that might want to get involved in sorting out some of the stuff on the client side in the UE, and some stuff on the right hand side, in terms of the data analytics and all of that. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at so far. And then, yes, as I say, the next step is to instantiate this in the 5G media streaming architecture. So here's the picture I showed you before, and then here's all the missing pieces. The yellow bits, which would show how it integrates in the 5G media streaming system. So, this thing that's doing data reporting gets instantiated in the 5GMS media session handler. All of this data collection AF reusable library gets instantiated in the 5GMS application function. And we can enhance the application server down here so that it reports application logs at this reference point as well. So that's kind of how we see it integrating into 5GMS. And this is kind of a different version of the same picture that shows those things I just described. So the media session handler doing some direct data reporting, the application server providing its application logs, and then we can expose the information to the 5GMS application provider here. So yeah, so these are the 5 new event types. So consumption reporting, metrics reporting I mentioned earlier, but also whenever you invoke the dynamic policy API, you can log that in the application function and expose that as an event, and similar for the network assistance API invocations. And then finally, the access logs that come from the application server. So those are the 5 things that are relevant for 5G media streaming instantiation of this architecture. And well, so kind of how does that all fit into later releases? Well, we could potentially extend the instantiation to multicast broadcast services as well. So that's something that's not happened yet, but something that we've thought about. There's all this stuff about edge as well. So maybe it'd be interesting to know, when things are getting instantiated in the edge, and maybe there's others as well. But this is kind of more future looking. So yeah, the conclusion is just a list of specs really. So these are the 2 specs that we've been implementing. 531 is the stage 2 architecture. 532 is the stage 3 APIs and protocols. But this sits within a much wider context. So SA2 defined the original architecture in 23288. We know that we've got 5G media streaming in 501 and 512, so that's where that gets instantiated. And then there's a whole load of lower level APIs and protocols that CT3 has defined, to expose these things downstream, to do the data analytics, and then the NEF exposure southbound and northbound as well, that get added in as well. So yeah, that's a quick summary. I think, yes. So I'll stop sharing there and allow Dev to take over because he's just going to show you a quick demo.
Hello, let me try to. Yeah, so Richard basically described the whole architecture in a high level context. So I will, in this page, I will go through the brief description about the demo. So we have, as a part of the demo, we have 4 Linux terminals, one to represent, or 5, one to represent the application provider, user equipment, and another to represent the data collection AF, and another one to represent the event consumer. So the steps involved in the demo or the application provider basically creates and configures a provisioning session. The UE creates a data reporting session and then submits first a single data report with UE communication details, and then submits another data report with a set of communication details, and then an event consumer creates a periodic subscription in the AF, including notification URI, and then a notification is sent by the application function to the specified URI, and then to see that if we submit another third data report, again a notification is sent to the same URI. And so to create a provisioning session, this is the JSON object that is being sent by the application service provider to the application function, and the event is the UE.com, which is the UE communication details with an application ID of my app ID. And then we have the provisioning session configuration, which includes a data access profile, and then that specifies your time access restrictions with the aggregation function of sum, and then the data collection client type, which we use internally for filtering the type of clients that the events can be exposed, and then for the data reporting session, we use the same application ID as we do in the provisioning session, and the supported domains, which is the communication, UE communication, and then we send the data, we submit, the UE submits the data reports, communication records with these values for the second data report, and then the AF event, an example, AF event subscription, and then the notification being sent to the specified URI. So this is the overall demo concept, and over here is the same architecture that Richard described in his slides, and then we have over here the application service provider with the provisioning application function, and then an event consumer AF belonging to this application service provider, and then an event consumer AF, which runs the notification server, and here we have the data collection application function, and here we have the UE, which is being mocked as a data collection. This is a test data collection AF reporting client. So let's start with the demo, and let's start with the data collection AF first. And then we start the data collection AF is quite chatty as it communicates with the underlying 5G networks and so forth. And then we start the server, and then we create a data reporting provisioning session over here. And then let me set the environmental variable. And then we do some sort of checking for the configuration that is being provided. For example, if I now send an invalid configuration, it will say that an error being passed, and then it will send what the invalid parameters are in the details. Now, if I submit a correct configuration, it has now created a configuration for the provisioning session now, because to map the data reports to the underlying context. We have a context which is part of the data report. Let me set that one. So now let's create a data reporting session. So we now have a data reporting session that is being created by the UAM. Set the environmental variable. Now let's submit the data reports to the application function. So we send. Okay, now two data reports have been submitted, and then now we'll send a event subscription to the AF, and then this event subscription has a notification, periodic notification of 10 seconds. Yeah, so now we could see that the events, the aggregate. So we had the two data reports that are being submitted, and that is being aggregated and sent as a event notification to the event consumer AF. Now let's try sending another data report, and then that should appear over in the consumer. Yeah, that has appeared in the event consumer as a notification for the UA communication information. So this basically demonstrates the end-to-end subscription and data reporting and the event notification mechanisms. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dev. Yeah, so that's us. Any questions that you have?